Hi everyone, I'm Lisa. You can reach me here. I'm going to talk to you today about DNA sequencing, and just for context, I'm not a professional in this at all, but this talk is a continuation of work I've been doing over the last 10 years, spread out like the workshops that were mentioned, working with the one commercial portable sequencer, figuring out how it works and passing that on to amateurs and artists, and building that DNA fluorometer. So what I'm going to talk about today, well, DNA sequencing, obviously, and I'm going to assume that we all know that DNA is kind of a long string of the 4 bases, A, G, C, T, and DNA sequencing is the process of figuring out what that sequence is for a given DNA molecule, something like that. The talk is also about the question, can we have an open DNA sequencing platform, and what might that look like? As mentioned, I've been working with the Nanopore Minion, which is this commercially available, very small sequencer. I brought mine. It's very small. You can probably not see it from the back, which is the whole point. And it's good fun, but the problem is that you're completely dependent on one vendor, because this thing, as it is just a very expensive paperweight. You need consumables to make it work, and you need them continuously. And they're all available from with that one vendor. It's also pretty expensive still to use it. So what do I mean by that? The device itself runs you about 3,500 euros at this point, which is not great, but even worse, the consumables run you about 500 euros per sequencing run. So anytime you want to sequence a sample, it's going to be 500 euros, which is really sad because it kind of precludes this playful, curiosity-driven approach to DNA sequencing, something like, it's at 3 a.m. on a Monday and I desperately need to know how the spiders in my bathroom are related to each other. Like, they're obviously the same species, but are they all the same family? Is there a different clan living by the window and under the bathtub? This is clearly not a serious scientific project, and I wouldn't want to spend 500 euros to find out, but what if I didn't have to? What would that look like? And for that, I'm going to start with a requirements/wish list for open DNA sequencing. 1, it should be suitable for in-field use, and ideally that would mean I could chuck it into my backpack when I'm going hiking, but as we're going to see, that's a little bit ambitious, so I would settle for, I want to take it to a hacker camp or a conference and put it in checked luggage. For that, I'm going to want to keep the size and weight down. I want to worry about the power budget and ask whether it can run off of the battery. Robustness and operating conditions are a concern, like does it have to sit on a stable surface during the run? And run times are also a concern because mostly sequencing runs take several hours. Next one, safety. This should be safe for in-home and in-community lab use, which is a pretty serious constraint already, as we're going to see. This means I'd like to avoid toxic chemicals, I'd like to avoid dangerous currents, and UV shielding is a concern, all of that. Next one, the supported applications. I am willing to concede that we maybe don't need to be able to sequence the whole human genome with it. We might be happy with limiting ourselves to something like SNP analysis and species identification. And 4, it should be open, and that means hardware, software, and wetware. And this is maybe a good time to make a bigger point. The DNA sequencing system will be an interplay of open hardware, open wetware, and open software. And unfortunately, among the 3, the state of open wetware is very sad at the moment. The good folks of open wetware are trying to change it, as are the open bioeconomy lab folks, but it's still far away to go. And for our DNA sequencing system, this would mean giving preference to reagents that are well documented, widely available, instead of having to rely on expensive vials of magical mystery juice where the vendor keeps the composition a trade secret, which is sadly extremely common in wetware. Okay. First off, the fundamental problem with DNA sequencing that you have to solve is that DNA is too small and the chemical bases too similar that you can just look at it and read the sequence off directly. There's been research on it, but there hasn't been a breakthrough. So all of the sequencing technologies that we do have work indirectly by converting sequencing information into something that we can measure more easily. There's a bunch of these available by now, and with our wish list in mind, there's one that I find particularly interesting, which is Sanger sequencing, also called DNA sequencing like it's 1977, because that's when this was invented. It's still in use today. It's been used to do the Human Genome Project, so it's got some jobs. And among all the sequencing technologies, the hardware and the hardware requirements are the most accessible. And I have to stress here that it's not even so much about the hardware requirements, because I suspect that about half the people in this room could build the hardware platform for some other sequencing technologies as a fun side project. But for Sanger sequencing, the reagents are the most accessible. There's also not much in the way of patenting that you have to worry about. It's very well documented. There's a ton of literature on it. And all of the components are widely available from lots of different manufacturers. Okay. I really wanted to show you how the Sanger reaction works here, because it is a really clever piece of biochemistry, but we couldn't fit it into the 20 minutes. We're gonna have to make do without, and we're gonna have to keep it a little bit abstract. I'm just gonna talk you through the general flow of the process. You start with a DNA sample, and you run the Sanger reaction on it. And you just need to know two things about the Sanger reaction. One of them, I assume we all know what PCR is at this point, thanks to a certain coronavirus, at least in the abstract. And the Sanger reaction is very similar to PCR, and it uses some of the same reagents and has pretty much the same hardware requirements, for which there are already several open hardware projects like OpenPCR and Pocket PCR. And also building a PCR thermocycler is kind of like the hello world of open labware, so I'm going to consider this a solved problem. Next up, what the Sanger reaction does is essentially it converts the problem, what is the AGCT sequence of this molecule, to the much easier problem of how long is this DNA molecule. Again, sorry about not showing you, it's really cool. I have an animation, maybe I can provide a link later. And the reason this is a much easier problem is this is a Swiss Army knife technique of molecular biology, just telling how long a DNA molecule is. It's called electrophoretic size separation, or electrophoresis for short. And there are three broad approaches you can take for that. I don't know which one's going to be the winner. I'm just going to run you through all three of them and give an overview of the challenges and the advantages. First up is slab gel electrophoresis, which literally uses a slab of gel 30 by 40 centimeters. And the way it works is very simple. DNA is negatively charged, so if you put it into an electric field, it's going to migrate to the positive pole, which gives us the ability to pull a DNA molecule from A to B. And if we put kind of an obstacle course in the middle of it, that a large molecule takes longer to migrate through than a small one, then that gives us the ability to separate DNA molecules by size. You can think of it maybe like you're trying to get through a crowd and you have a bunch of friends with you, you don't want to lose each other, so you hold each other's hands, form a long chain, and weave through the crowd like that. And it's going to take you much, much longer than if you're just by yourself. Same thing sort of applies for DNA molecules. The obstacle course is made of a polymer that has variable size pores, and the DNA sort of weaves through that. So, slab gel, as I said, polyacrylamide, big slab of it. The slab gel is immersed in a liquid buffer, as are the electrodes. You apply a voltage across the whole thing, and then the DNA migrates through the gel towards the positive pole. Setup looks a little bit like this. And then in the next step, you have to sort of make the DNA visible, which is not on its own. You do that using a DNA dye, which has the extremely cool property that it fluoresces only if it's bound to DNA. Otherwise, it just doesn't do anything. So you can make the DNA visible like that, and then you get this band pattern that you can reconstruct the sequence from. This is from Sanger's original paper, actually an earlier one. But same principle, that's the band pattern, you can reconstruct the DNA sequence from that. A few considerations for that. One, you use polyacrylamide gels, which has great resolution, which means you can tell a 50 base pair long DNA molecule from a 51 base pair long molecule. The problem is that the precursor for it is acrylamide. You have to use that to make the gels, and it's a very unpleasant neurotoxin that absolutely has to be handled with care and under a fume hood. And I would not be comfortable having that around a community lab or a home. It also generates hazardous waste. It's just nasty stuff. I'd really like to avoid that. There's an alternative that is often used in gel electrophoresis called agarose, which is non-toxic, but it has a lower resolution. Although there have been papers that have pushed it to a single nucleotide resolution, so that might be an option. Or there might be another polymer out there that gives us both single nucleotide resolution and is non-toxic. I don't know. Next consideration is power. So you might have seen DIY gel electrophoresis that looks like that, and that works for some applications, not for Sanger sequencing, because Sanger sequencing pushes you to the limits of what electrophoresis can give you, and you're not going to get there with a Tupperware box and a stack of 9-volt blocks. Because, just to give you an idea, sequencing gels are run at 1700 volts, at 70 watts, for 4 to 8 hours. It's a lot, that's a lot of power, I know. You also have to run it at constant power, meaning the power supply has to dynamically adjust the voltage and the current, because the resistance of the buffer and the gel fluctuates during the run. And if you don't do that, then you're just gonna run your gel hot, it's gonna melt, it's gonna crack, it's gonna be useless. Then other consideration related to that, with great power comes great thermal management. You absolutely have to do that. In practice, when you do these runs, you have to cool both the gel and the buffer continuously. Next ones I'm going to skip over because I already have too many things here. That was it for slab gel electrophoresis, and capillary electrophoresis switches out the biggest slab for thin glass tube, like 50 to 100 micrometers across and tens of centimeters long, filled with a viscous polymer, not polyacrylamide, you use other polymers for that. Then you inject the sample at one end of the tube, you apply voltage, and then the DNA migrates through the capillary, and you detect it at the other end of it using a fluorescent detection unit. Kind of like this. Because it is essentially a long, thin column of buffer, it's a much higher resistance path than a slab gel, which means you can run it at higher voltages, but in the microamp range rather than milliamps, which is friendly currents. The heat dissipation is also much nicer in such a setup, so you can run faster slab gels without melting your gel, which makes for nicer run times. The downside is that glass capillaries are prone to breakage. The sample injection can be really finicky, and you need a very precise alignment of the detection assembly. The detection window is very small, so you have to align everything very precisely. Both of these things are not really friendly if you want to chuck into a backpack, I imagine. So. And the last option that we have is microfluidics electrophoresis, which uses a small area chip or glass slide or even paper and serpentine channels that kind of fold along the migration path into a small surface area. And remember, the distance between electrodes determines how much power you need. So if you can fold the migration path into a small distance for electrodes, then you can run the whole thing in much lower power. And there has been, it's been proven. There's papers from 2003, meaning it's really old at this point and proves out the whole thing. So in principle, this would work. The downside of microfluidics is that fabrication can be a little bit tricky, it's challenging, although it has gotten a lot more accessible over the years. And the good folks from Bacteria have been doing a lot of work on DIY microfluidics already. It's a wonderful rabbit hole, but one that I haven't gotten to go down myself much. Okay, with this, we're in the workflow at this point, so there's just one empty space, and that is there because at some point you're going to have to make your DNA visible, because on its own you can't see it. And how you do that is you use a DNA dye. I mentioned that already. You add it to your DNA sample, you shine a light of one wavelength on it, and then it fluoresces on different wavelengths only if it's bound to a DNA. The popular setups in the last years have used blue light and one of the green DNA dyes like gel green and cyber green. And the excitation emission spectra looks something like this. This is called gel green, but they are pretty much all the same. And you can see that the excitation and emission peaks are very close together, which makes for a very noisy fluorescent signal and much higher requirements for sensing and for filtering. There are different dyes. The red DNA dyes, which have a much larger distance, but they also need to be excited at around 275 nanometers, which means UVC. Can get away with UVB, but this used to be traditionally mean that you need a UVB bulb or a deuterium arc lamp or something crazy like that, which have high power requirements and heat up a lot, and they're also bulky, and you need to shield the whole assembly for UV radiation. In short, it's not a lot of fun to work with in a portable device. However, over the last years, very exciting, UVC LEDs have become much more accessible. 10 years ago, they were available, but they cost 300 euros a piece or something crazy like that, and nowadays they cost a few euros. And they give us the very cheap option of cleanly separating the excitation light from the emission light of the red DNA dyes, which is very exciting, and a huge step forward for the detection side of things. Let's skip that. And with that, we have our whole workflow covered. And this was a lot of ground to cover, so I'm just going to try to put everything into one slide. Okay. Status quo. It's very dissatisfying. DNA sequencing for fun and in-field use. The closest available candidate is proprietary and too expensive for fun use. It's also dependent on one vendor, and they have been doing some not so nice things in the last years in terms of cost. DNA sequencing open system would mean open hardware, open wetware, and open software. And of these, open wetware is in the saddest state of the three, sadly. Finally, we have this whole workflow. There are already open hardware projects for part of this workflow. Another part is by now much more accessible thanks to cheaper UVC LEDs. And the remaining problems are mostly in electrophoresis, for which there are three approaches. Slap-gel electrophoresis is the lowest tech one, but it's very unclear whether it can give us what we need in terms of portability, safety, and power requirements. Capillary electrophoresis is a lot better. However, it's kind of finicky to work with, and you also still need kind of a long tube that needs to be handled carefully, so maybe not so great for in-field use. And then there's microfluidic electrophoresis, which is the most promising of the three, but still kind of an open quantity for DIY use. And that was it. Now you know pretty much everything I know about open DNA sequencing. If any of this sounded at all interesting to you, I would be excited to talk to you. Thank you.